the money was huge, the money was big, and things were super expensive in Japan. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Joy,
I live in the US,
and I live in England
and we were across the world.
on a mission. Hello, and welcome to this episode where we are going to be looking at money. How we survived in the Ukraine. Was there any money? Where did we get it from? We're going to be delving into that. We thank you so much for joining us week after week, for tuning in. And we're just wanting to ask you to like, share, subscribe so that the videos can reach, many, many people. We thank you so much for your support. And we will now delve into this evening's presentation. Michelle, how
Money,
did
money,
you
money,
manage with money?
money. Money, right? Isn't that how it all started? We
Yep.
initially thought about going to Asia so that we can make a little money so we can get back to school. Little did we know that God had other plans for us. Isn't that how we are as humans? We tend to have this thing where we have our own plans, and then God is the one that sets the way, sets the path for us, exactly where He wants us to go. So, yeah, money was initially part of why we were called or what pushed us in that direction. But it wasn't the real reason that we went to Asia. Um, when I got there, the money, anytime you travel, you have to sort and figure out the money. I had no thoughts in my head about what that would be like before I left my home country to go to Asia. When I got there and I saw the money, then I was like, oh. So the Taiwan dollar, it's called the new Taiwan dollar, the NT they would call it. And that dollar was it's about 30 to 1 at the time that I was there. I think now it's 32 to 1, the exchange rate. Things weren't in Taiwan weren't as bad when it comes to cost of living. I felt like cost of living wasn't too crazy. Things were not expensive, but not super cheap either. But it was somewhere in the middle. In Japan, however, the Japanese yen was about at the time I was there was about 109 to 1 US dollar. Now I think it's somewhere around 150, 50 something to 1 US dollar. So um, clearly, if you're shopping in Japan, I think I'm going to focus a little bit more in Japan when it comes to the money, because the money was the big thing for me in Japan. Because Japanese dollar was broken down into, they had a 50 a $50 coin, a $50 coin. They had $100 coin, 100 yen. I'm saying dollar. Sorry guys, I'm saying dollars. 100 yen coin, and then we had $5,000 bill. They had a $10,000 yen. So the money was huge. The money was big, and things were super expensive in Japan. How about you, Joy?
Well, in the Ukraine, we use grivna. Yeah, that's the currency, grivna. And at the time when I was there, one grivna was sorry, $1 was equal to about between 5 to 8 US dollars at the time when I was there. And so I found it to be, well, their currency was strong when obviously back in the day when we went there. But what I found, um, the wages were very meager, very small wages. People existed on so very little. Even for us back in the day, $200 was nothing, and people were getting paid less than that per month. And I'm talking about teachers and policemen who were in my classes, and they would tell me, what their typical income was like. They were paid obviously in grivnas, but it was, when you did the conversion, it was like maybe sometimes between maybe 70 or 100 and maybe 20, 30 dollars,
Mhm.
and it was just meager, so like Michelle said, initially we were saying, oh, we're gonna go on the mission field to earn some money to come back to put towards our schooling, and we thought that this was gonna rake in a lot of. No, it didn't. It wasn't the case at all.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we learned very quickly as we got there, and we kind of knew this before, that we would receive a stipend. It wasn't a salary, it was a voluntary position. And, coming from Jamaica, we were in Jamaica at the time. Coming from Jamaica, the Jamaican dollar was running pretty high against the US dollar as well. And so, we were going to be able to make some money, save up some money, and come back to school. But when we got there, we learned what our stipend was going to be. We would have enough to be able to buy food. We didn't have to pay for rent because we were given living accommodations. We were given a stipend just for food and for necessary things that we would need to just keep ourselves afloat in Taiwan and Japan and Ukraine. And I remember I was living in an apartment building, like I mentioned earlier, that had an entire set of teachers. We had an entire apartment building for us. So there were 12 or more hotel apartments within that apartment building. And so we would come together from time to time. My floor had about maybe 6 teachers. So we would cook together. Sometimes we would cook and say, you can eat. We would have different times when we would have potluck for church. So Sabbath potluck, we would just each make a dish and we would bring to potluck. So it wasn't that tight financially. We were able to really put aside some money and save. We would also have people who would cook for us or take us out to lunch and dinner. So we didn't always have to spend our money. I mean, our students were so generous. They would buy us so many things that, to be honest, even though we had a stipend, I had more than I could ever want in my experience there. I wasn't
Mm,
at a lack for anything at
mm,
no point. Only thing we were in charge of paying, if we had a phone, we would pay our phone bills, we would pay um, for food and stuff like that. And that's what it was. That's how we got around. And we didn't have a car. We drove bicycles, so you don't have to pay for gas, none of that. So it was pretty simple.
mm. I think transportation for me was a little bit different, because we took the metro a lot to places. So I'd have to get like a metro pass.
Hmm.
So obviously we'd have to pay for that. And sometimes we went on the little buses, but it wasn't the little local buses. It was very infrequent that we would use, buses, because really when we're leaving one town to the next major town. So it would be mostly trains. But like you said, we were given stipend, a monthly stipend, and we were given more than the the regular people earned. So I felt, when I was there, I felt quite wealthy in terms of what I was given in comparison to what the locals were making, every month. And to us, really, it
Yeah.
wasn't a lot, but
Yeah.
we were making more than the locals were making. And like you said about the generosity of our students, they would want to take you everywhere. And even when you offer to pay, they're like, no, no.
Yes.
So they would
Yes.
want to do
They would
everything
fight
for
you to
you.
pay.
exactly, they're fighting to want to get this for you. So most of our finances, we didn't really have to spend a lot when we went out, especially with our students. They were very lovely students.
Yeah.
Rent we didn't pay, like Michelle said. The school took care of that, and electricity. For heating, we didn't really pay anything. We didn't pay nothing really, living accommodation wise. It's only food that we would buy, and we were able. Well, I was able to buy the best of, fresh fruit and fresh veg and all those things while living there. I really wish those times would come back, to be honest, just going off subject,
I would.
because it was a very, really, really, really good time when you could afford,
Yeah. I
to
would
do
say like
certain things.
even in Japan, Japan to me, out of the two countries that I was in, Japan was the most expensive one because
Hmm.
like you would go to buy a loaf of bread, like let's say a loaf of bread, and you're paying like 20, 30, 40 yen for it, and the bread was very small. It wasn't like the
Mm.
bread that I was used to, like the loaf of bread I was used to getting. It was like a half of that loaf of bread you would get. Transportation in Japan was super expensive. Um, if we were traveling from, like, I was in Yokohama, and there were some teachers who were in Hiroshima or Osaka. And so in Osaka, it traveling Japan was just crazy because it was so wide. The country was so wide that you would take hours to get to Osaka, hours to get to Hiroshima. I was closer to Tokyo, so I could go to Tokyo by train. But if I wanted to go to Osaka, I would have to fly, and
Oh.
that was so expensive. Flying in Japan was expensive. So we didn't get
Mm.
to move around apart from just the nearby cities and towns in and around Tokyo that we were able to go to because of money. And even
Mm.
traveling to other countries from Japan was expensive. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I
Yeah.
think that was the opposite for me, because we're right in the middle of Europe, Ukraine, where we were bordering like Poland, Hungary, um, those countries, Romania, you know, Latvia, and all those places. They were easy to get to, and for example, when we traveled from the Ukraine to Russia, it was a train ride, a long train ride, overnight ride, but you could get there by train. You could get to Poland by train. You fly, and it was the tickets were not super expensive where you cannot get on the flight. And I did, actually, while I was living there, I did most of my traveling in Europe while living there and being
Hey,
and
that's
serving
smart.
on the mission field.
That's
Yeah,
smart.
because it was affordable.
Hmm. That's
Yeah.
smart. So, Joy, we're talking about money and finances there. And, we did talk about initially leaving for money, but then, well, partly for money. And then just encountering the money that we were receiving there. And just quick question about lessons learned. I want to ask in a question form. Were you ever hungry while you were there?
Never, never.
Did you get paid a salary?
Yes, I wasn't paid a salary. I would say a salary, but they call it a
No,
stipend.
you were paid a stipend, right?
Because you
All
know
right.
what they would do, just side note, they would apologize when they're paying you, because they're like, oh, we know that you, because what they would do is they would work out how much you were getting in your country, like a typical person. And because we would get way less than a typical person would earn, say back here in England, they would be so apologetic when they're paying you at the end of the month when
It
you
was a
receive your
stipend.
stipend. They were like, I'm so
You
sorry.
you didn't get a
Yeah,
salary. You were getting a stipend.
a
Cool.
stipend.
So you got a stipend, right?
Yeah,
And were you ever homeless while you were there?
never.
Did you not have a roof? Were you warm the whole time?
Warm, warm, fed, everything.
Lesson learned, guys. Our lesson together, together, we had no lack when we were
Amen.
on God's mission. Lesson right here. Don't ever be afraid to do what God is calling you to do because you don't have the money. God will always provide.
Amen.
Thank you for
Amen.
joining us. We'll see you on the next episode. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Joy.
I live in the US.
And I live in England.
And we were across the world
On a mission.